and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. My name is Dan Allen, and welcome, James.
Oh, well, I feel like a teenager.
You are a teenager, aren't you?
You were going to say I look like a teenager, but then you stopped because I don't.
It's like Big. Have you seen Big with Tom?
I have, yeah, with Tom Hanks.
Hanks?
I'm not even sure I am big. A lot of teenagers are quite massive, actually, these days.
Some of them are.
A lot of kids turn up. Yeah, Young Film Academy Summer Camp, the Giants.
Yes.
But all that's slightly off topic for today, because we're talking confessions of a DP. So first of all, Dan, what is a DP?
DP. DP stands for Director of Photography. It's DOP. DOP.
No one says DOP, do they?
If you see any slang in a text message from a film person, they're like, bring in the DOP. Then they're talking about the Director of Photography, who is the person who is essentially in charge of the camera department, right? They are in charge of the visuals, working with the director to photograph that movie. I don't know what I'm doing with my voice, but you know.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, because I was thinking about this before we came on air, is that a lot of young filmmakers, in my experience, kind of there are certain roles that they're not really aware of in terms of their filmmaking, TV making process. And there are some that they obviously are. And, writers, directors, producers, actors, and actually director of photography is often one of the ones that they do know, because they know that someone's holding the camera, technically making the thing happen. And we see a lot of quite passionate young people come to us at Young Film Academy who are really interested in this, because I think for a number of different sort of types of young person, there's people who come to it because they're kind of interested in art, and they kind of know they've got a visual eye, and they might not have the technical skills, but they want to have a go and just see how that technical stuff. Or some come at it from a very, they are super technically minded. They're very, we get a lot of young people come to us. They're 12, 13, 15, 17, 18, 19, and they are just very technically minded, and they want to learn some of the more sort of compositional aspects. And often they get a huge amount out of becoming DPs. And I suppose the third that we see at Young Film Academy type is young people who come thinking, I've never thought about it before, but actually when I got on set and when I was making my movie, that was the role that really appealed to me, and I really enjoyed it. So it's going to be really good, because what D-DOP are we speaking to?
And we've basically we got out our filmmaker fishing rod, and we put a light on the end of the hook, and we sort of dangled it in the stream, and we've managed to snag ourselves an incredible DOP. We've snagged ourselves a Dan Emmons, who is a cinematographer who has worked in commercials, in feature films. He's having just done his debut feature film with Marc Coleman, which is called Manfish. And he's also worked on some high-end television as well, including, I think he did the show from the creator of that show. You know the one?
No idea what you're talking about.
The BBC one.
Whilst you think about that,
Line of Duty guy's new show. He worked on that.
Tipping Point.
Maybe.
Something like that. And in fact, I was lucky to work with Dan last year. We were doing a project kind of Stranger Things style. It was all magical and set in different kind of. We got to create portals and light all things crazily, and it's super fun. So we're really pleased to have Dan with us.
Okay, we are recording, and welcome to the podcast, Dan Emmons. How's it going?
Yeah, all good. Thanks for having me. How are you guys?
Very good, very good. James? Well, I can't speak for James. Yeah.
Well, I'm good, and I'm very excited to hear about this these confessions of yours, Dan. This is a confessional.
How deep are we going?
Very deep.
As deep as you are willing to allow us, essentially.
Cool.
Without throwing shade, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll keep names out of it.
I'll
talk totally ambiguous. Yeah.
So I mean, maybe one of the best ways of starting these confessions is maybe to think about sort of what shocked you, maybe sort of when you got into the world of cinematography.
What shocked me?
Yeah, what surprised you on your journey thus far?
Good question. What shocked me? I suppose. Well, it was interesting. I suppose, yeah. When I was growing up, like we've talked about before, that I knew about cinematography and I knew the term, and I guess I sort of understood a bit about it. But I guess learning about what it really means and what the hierarchy is and stuff's very interesting, and it's sort of a bit surprising when you sort of realize that actually. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned quite early was that cinematography is not really about the camera. It's much more about lighting, which I thought was a very interesting thing to sort of delve into. And as soon as I realized that, I was able to sort of progress my cinematography a lot quicker, because I realized that, focusing on the technology and the cameras and how many different types and flavors of all that there are doesn't actually make you a better cinematographer by using a better camera. What makes you a better cinematographer is better lighting and paying much more attention to that element of it.
So can we just clear up some terminology before we start? So I think a lot of young people might have heard the term DP. They've heard the term cinematographer. Are they the same thing? What is a DP? What does it stand for? What's the difference? What do we call it?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So Director of Photography is what DOP or DP stand for. My understanding is that just interchangeable. Cinematography and Director of Photography are the same job. I don't know if it's an American English thing or it's just an old school Hollywood versus modern day thing. But I guess the term Director of Photography is distinguishing that you are effectively in charge of what is called photography on film, which is a confusing term because people think photography and video is different things, but actually, video is photography. It's just 25 frames a second of photography rather than a single image that you might think normally.
And I think that's really interesting, because when we work with a lot of young people at Young Film Academy, there's that just working out what roles do what and who's responsible for what is often a little confusing. So can you tell us, when you're on a set, whether you're doing a movie or an advert or TV or whatever, what would you say if you're the head of a department, of that department? What is your overall responsibility? What's your bag?
Yeah, I suppose it's interesting. It does come down a lot to your relationship with the director, because that's a very important part of any project, and different directors and different cinematographers will have different ways of working together. Some directors are very technical minded and they will understand a lot more about the cameras and lights and framing and lenses that they want. And then other directors will have no idea at all. And then it's your job to guide them. But I guess to put it in simpler terms, cinematography, your job is everything visual on screen. So usually a director is in charge of the story and the performances and, getting the script onto the screen. And your job as cinematographer is how you're actually capturing that visually and all the visual elements to it. And obviously you've got production designers and art directors who have their, they put their pieces on the screen in terms of how the set's dressed and made up. But you tend to work very closely with those people because I think, your job is to make sure that everything looks great. So if you're unhappy with production design, then that's something you get involved in as well.
How much back and forth is there? I mean, I'm sure you're going to say it depends on the project and how much time you have. But in an ideal world, on a big project, are you both in the pre-production meetings? How does that relationship evolve? Because I imagine, where the lights are on set is production design, but that is also cinematography, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I personally always try and get involved as early as possible. And I want to be a part of all the conversations, partly because I'm a control freak, but also just because I think it's important. And then I will always reach out to the production designer, even if we're not put in touch together naturally. I will always try and reach out and have conversations about, like you say, what are we actually doing? What colors and textures and tones are we using? And everything from, a big part of lighting is practical elements as well. So a lamp on a table, or, you wouldn't usually use room lights, but you might do if they're nice, or the budget, or you're in a hospital and there's fluorescent lighting or anything like that, where it's very specific. But that all comes down to the relationship with production design and finding a happy medium between everything.
Super cool. Have there ever been any moments sort of early on in the process where you were like, oh no, what are they doing?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I think usually, most of those early conversations is trying to suss people out and trying to work out, what their vibe is, what they like, what they don't like, and then trying to make sure that you're on the same page. But I think, a lot of it comes down to locations you're shooting in as well. If you're in a white room, that's obviously quite a challenge to make it look nice. Whereas if you're in a beautiful church, there's very little the art director needs to do. So there's early on, recce's come into it and location scouting comes into it, and that obviously helps guide that. But yeah, sometimes you do get in situations where I get a bit more heavy-handed.
How many of you are generally there? So you go on a location scout, you're with, say, maybe, is it a production designer that would also be on the location scout? Like who's not there maybe? Is it?
Yeah, usually, again, it all comes down to the project and what the scale of it is. But in an ideal world, you would have your director, your DOP, obviously the producers and the AD, and then a production designer. And that's typically it. You might
assistant director,
sorry, yeah, who would be there looking at everything from where we're going to park to where we're going to eat to where we're going to put people when they're not on set, etc., etc.
Very nice.
That's right. And I suppose that, from again, looking down the lens of a lot of young people that we work with, they would often sort of go, well, the cinematographer or director of photography's job is to make the pictures look nice. So they will sort of go, it's, as long as it's in focus, because that's a big deal, right? And we'll talk about focus in a second. I mean, certainly my experience is, especially in the early days of film, and we'll talk a little bit later maybe in terms of film versus video, but when it was very difficult to see what you were shooting actually at the time, which thankfully it isn't in video, just focus was always out. It was just a total pain in the ass. So the fact that, if the pictures look clean and in focus, there's an argument. You go, well, the cinematographer's done their job. So that would be one way of looking at it. But I know that there is then, you get into just so much more complexity of sort of tone and look and feel and stuff like that. So maybe kind of talk us through some of that. So beyond that, everything's in focus and it looks clean and it's at a high resolution. Yeah. Sort of what kind of what kind of decisions are you making and how are you achieving that?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because when you start out doing cinematography, you probably don't have much help and it's just you and a camera and that you are the department entirely, when you're starting out making small budget projects. So suddenly things like, is it in focus? Is it exposed? Is it nice and clean? Like you say, that is your primary concern because there's only so far you can go on your own. Whereas actually, as you move on and you progress, you worry about that kind of stuff less because when you get to working on larger productions, you have a team of people underneath you. So you have someone called a focus puller whose job is to make sure that it's in focus, and you don't have to worry about that anymore. You have camera assistants who worry about dealing with building the camera and putting the lenses on and swapping lenses and making sure the batteries are all charged and all that. So suddenly you're not worrying about that anymore. And as I said before, you really then start to become much more hands off from the camera side of things, and then it all comes down to style and tone, and what's in front of the camera becomes much more important than what you're looking through the camera to get.
And could you give us maybe talk about a particular project where you wanted a particular look and tone, and how you go about creating that just technically in either through the lights or the camera? Like, give us some example.
An example. I guess a good example. Okay, a good example.
Manfish.
I was thinking about Manfish. A good example of any. I think genre films are very good examples of where it's very important to nail that stuff. And by genre films, I mean things that are very specifically a horror or a sci-fi, things that aren't just a drama. Obviously, have a much more distinctive look to them than your average kitchen sink drama where it's your family in their home. A horror film has a very, very specific requirement for lighting based on whether, it's just what the audience expect from it, but also, when you're trying to create tension and things, those films tend to be a lot darker. They tend to be a lot more specific lighting wise, where you don't necessarily see everything, and you're trying to create, tension. And often a lot of those films are set at nighttime, or a lot of those films are set in, very dark places. So I think that's when lighting becomes really crucial, because so for example, we made a film called Manfish last year, which was a horror comedy. And that was a really interesting challenge because we didn't have a huge budget to just do everything and anything we want, and we didn't have all the time in the world. So a big part of that, and I think it's one of the most important things, is all the preparation you do before you get on set, because that's where you have all the time in the world. That's when you can have all those conversations with the director. That's when you can look at other films you like, other reference imagery you like, and start breaking down, okay, well, in this one, it's kind of a silhouette, they're lighting from behind, or, this one's quite warm lighting, whereas this one's quite cold lighting, or in horror films, you can go red or green, or, you can have quite stark lighting choices. And you have all those conversations because you've got all the time in the world before you get on set. And then the hope is that on set, you're just sort of executing those conversations. But with Manfish, it was an interesting challenge because we had a lot of different setups in different spaces that weren't necessarily fully dressed. We didn't have a huge art department team or anything. So it was a lot about, for example, we have one sequence where our main character, they've got a sea creature in the bath, and they're not sure whether it's escaped or not. So the main character has to creep around the corridors at the top to get to the bathroom, and we wanted it to be very tense and slow, and we're not quite sure what he's going to find when he gets there. But the corridor we're in is a white walled hallway, and not only that, we're on a second floor with quite a low ceiling, and it's a one shot, so you see every angle. There's nowhere to hide a light. So what we did in
all the white walls and
all the white walls,
spaces
nowhere to put anything. Yeah, exactly.
And for listeners, just white walls are infamously rubbish, right? Down in the sense of they very quickly get boring, I suppose.
It's hard to make them look nice. You've got to be you've got to think quite carefully about what, unless it requires it. If you're in a some kind of studio or something that's very very lit. But when it's a horror and you want it to be dark and creepy, not the best thing, because they bounce light is the biggest problem with them. So you put a light, on my face here, it's bouncing off all the white walls around me, and everything just becomes very flat, and you lose contrast, and you don't have, very dynamic looking shot. So in that situation, I think what we did was we put what's called a diffusion cloth, which basically you put in between lighting and your subject to make the lighting a lot softer and the shadows a lot less dense and less sharp. So we put that across the stairwell, and then we lit from underneath that with some tungsten lights, which are a warmer color temperature. So it was all
and get very hot.
They do get very hot. Yeah. So it was very very warm, no pun intended, warm light coming from underneath. So it was all very uplit, which gave obviously our character a lot of interesting shadows on their faces. And then what I did in that film is I blacked all of the ceilings in the house we were in. So we spent in our pre-lighting, which you don't always get, but sometimes you get a day before you start filming to just get the space ready. We got black, and it was only black, what's called muslin, but it was just cheap black material that we just literally pinned corner to corner across all the ceilings, just to stop that light that we were shining up bouncing back down from above, because the black soaks up the light to help just retain the contrast.
Really interesting. Yeah, I mean, and I suppose that the sort of the technical, as far as I've seen, kind of the lights themselves have just got better over time, especially the last 10 years. They seem to have actually got sort of cheaper to buy and cheaper to hire, therefore, which is kind of linked. And they seem to, because they've gone kind of LED like the rest of the world, so they're using less energy. They don't get so physically hot. They can be more easily battery operated because they're not using so much power. And then you get this sort of, I've seen these cool panels that you guys are using nowadays where you can do all these cool effects where it almost like, it's got like a remote control, and you can make it do candlelight and all that. I mean, I remember the days of people wafting things in front of old lights to make candlelight. It's like you've got to reflect exactly just to get that flickering effect. And you can get them to do kind of flashes and strobes and sirens and all this stuff. It's almost like it's become like a technical box of tricks now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much LED technology now, and it's all, like you say, the biggest, I think the biggest thing, apart from the impact on the environment and stuff, is that actually that you can power it off of a normal switch in your house or off of a battery. Whereas, when in old terms with big lights like the what's called HMIs or big tungsten lights, those needed generators or much larger power sources. So the fact you can bring in a light that's as powerful as that and plug it into the wall, and it's not using up, you're not racking up an electricity bill for whoever's house you're in, is really great. And one of the most amazing things I'm like learning about a bit more these days is how much of, there's a company called Aperture who do a lot of very, very good LED.
I think we've
affordable.
got some of their panels
at Young Film Academy, don't we?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and a lot of their stuff is moving to being app controlled, so you can control it all from your phone. So where in the past you would have a guy with a board with loads of faders on it, maybe, that's all hooked up to the lights, and he's able to control them all. He or she is able to control them all from there. Nowadays, my gaffers, I ask for a light to be turned up or down, and they just stand there and they bring out their phone and they just go whoop.
Done.
Okay, done. Which is amazing. Yeah, they don't have to wander away from me. They can, but it means they can stand next to me. We can have conversations, and we can be like, "Turn it on. What do you think? No, I like it. I don't like it. Turn it off." And it's immediate.
Wow.
It's not,
which is perfect until it stops working.
Yeah, well,
yeah. For some reason, then everyone goes, "I don't know why it doesn't work." And tell us briefly, because we're actually we're planning an episode later on where we maybe doing a sort of quiz on kind of the crazy names you get in the credits of a movie. All the million jobs that people go, "What the hell is that?" So I think you just mentioned one. So a gaffer. So talk to us. People have seen this, and maybe you might just do a best boy as well, because I think that's in your department. So what do these people do?
Yeah, that's the common one that everyone wants to know. So I guess a really, really quick breakdown of who might be under a DOP. So you've got obviously two departments. You've got lighting and camera. So on lighting side, you've got a gaffer who is your head of lighting. So they are in charge of the entire lighting department. So they are your direct contact.
So they're sort of the gaffer.
They are, yeah.
In that sort of, because gaffer is slang for like the boss, right?
Exactly. That's where it comes from, I think. So they are in charge of the lighting department, and on a larger production, they're not necessarily that hands-on either. They're your intermediary. So they are having creative conversations with you. They're coming up with solutions with you, but then they're delegating to all the people underneath them. So the best situation is where your gaffer is stood next to you and not off adjusting things or figuring things out. And then underneath them, they've got what's called a best boy. That tends to be like the gaffer's first assistant. I think typically they tend to be more in charge of sort of the electrics and worrying about all of the electrical elements to lighting. There is a bit of a difference between American and English, where they, in England, we have our lighting guys will put lights on stands and move stands around and do all the stands, whereas in America, that's not the norm. It's the grips who are in charge of all of which is another group of people who are in charge of all of the stands and stuff. So, which is a weird way of working, because you ask your lighting guys if they can put a light on a stand. They have to then ask someone to put a stand up. Then they get the light. Then they put the light on the stand, and it's like, I could have just done that myself at this point. But I think it's American. And in the camera side, you might have a camera operator. Then you have what's called a first assistant camera, which is a focus puller, but they are actually in charge of the camera department, in my opinion anyway. The camera operator isn't typically in charge. The first AC is in charge of the camera department. Then you've got second AC, which tend to do the clapperboard and batteries and cards and things like that. And then you might have some trainees underneath that. Yeah. Right. Okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. Yeah, because I think grips have best boys as well. Yeah, so I think it's just the next down the line, the best person on the team, the highest ranking member of the team, I guess.
Who's also a teenager. They can't be a man. They must be best boy
or
girl,
or a girl, or any
apparently girls get called best boys. That I just also read.
Yeah, I had a conversation recently with a gaffer friend of mine who is female, and she was complaining that someone had asked her to be a best boy on something. She was like, "Can't we just say best person?" Like, we're not there yet.
It's probably about time, isn't it? To be honest, but it's just like, having to sort of how you enforce that, because there's no sort of like there's no real movie police.
No,
you can do whatever you want.
Just hopefully productions just slowly start adopting it. But then, when someone's then credited as best person, can they then get the job on the next shoot? Because people were like, "Well, I don't actually know what you did on that one." Yeah. But
it's
hopefully,
a tricky one.
Hopefully, it filters down.
Can I, Dan, pick you up? So I've got one little DP bugbear, but I think everyone just does it. So it's cars. It's lighting in cars. So watch next time any listeners are out there watching a movie set at night time, and you've got people driving a car. You'll see them driving, and we've all got totally used to it, so we don't even think about it. But essentially, you notice that they're being lit from below, often with a slightly blue light that's really quite light. And actually, if you get in a car, you'll realize there's no light on you basically at all.
No.
So talk to us through this. This has become like a trope, right? Because I suppose you've just got to light them somehow. So otherwise they're just dark.
Yeah, there's a few different ways. It depends on what you're doing with the car. So there's a few different approaches. One is, it depends if the car's actually moving or not. Because if, sometimes a car is stationary and then they use the lighting or sometimes some projected elements or something to make it look like the car's driving. But that's when you get in films where people are doing this. You're like, no one drives like this. Like you'd be pulled over very quickly.
For listeners, that was Dan simulating.
Sorry.
Pulling a steering wheel left and right. That would in no way correlate to the way the car's actually moving.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got that, or another approach is that people actually put a car effectively on a trailer and they do drive it around on the back of a big truck, like a articulated lorry thing. I think it is just a necessity thing. I think some people, just throw a light wherever they can fit it. And often, if you're pointing a camera at an actor's face, you're seeing a lot of the top half of a car, including the roof. So therefore, underneath is the only option.
And it sort of sits on their lap usually, isn't it? It's a little panel often.
That sometimes, I'm not a big fan of that approach. I tend to try and light from outside the car, and you've got things like we were talking about you can get sort of very special lights called Astera tubes. There's other brands, but they're like a tube, and you can actually have them do like a sequence where some light moves along it over and over again as a sequence, which simulates passing.
Sort of pulsing. That's clever.
So passing headlights or passing street lights or whatever. So the lights
can that be controlled via an app as well? Or...
Yeah, it can. Yeah. So you'll usually sequence it in the app, and you can slow it up, speed it, change the color.
No way. So with that faster traffic, you're driving faster.
Yeah, or make it randomized so it's not so repetitive.
Wow.
So that's one thing a lot of people do. Obviously, the old classic is having. Usually you have got like two, and you might see it sometimes in a behind the scenes thing where you've got two lights on a stand and someone's just rotating them by hand, and then the light's obviously moving past as if
like
a
sort of headlights almost moving. Like a lighthouse. Yeah,
exactly.
So they're simulating a lighthouse.
But usually on those you've got 10 different people doing various. Someone's got a branch and someone's moving the lights, so it looks a bit mad. But the other approach I sometimes do is you've got certain panels called. I call them flexi panels, but there's lots of different names. But they're basically LED panels, but they're flexible and you can move them and roll them up and rotate them. And they're like cloth, but with lights on. And if a car's got a sunroof, I'll often, on a project I did a few years ago where it was a one-take film, where, again, we had nowhere to put lights without them coming into shot at some point. And I had no way of controlling it. What I did was I took the sunroof back and I replaced it with one of these flexible panels that I forced into position with some diffusion. And because I could create a slightly curved diffusion, it had sort of a nice 360 degree light. And basically that was all powered from a battery on a little box through a cable next to the driver. So in the sequence of this film, it was up to the actor to keep it off, and then as soon as that scene was coming up, as soon as the camera was coming nearby, they leant down, turned it on for me, and we all got in and did our scene. And So it was a bit of a choreographed thing. But,
so the actors became part of the lighting team.
Yeah, the actor became my best boy. Yeah.
That's super cool. With sorry, you go, James. Okay, with obviously gaffers and stuff. You mentioned earlier on about how real cinematography is actually about lighting. I was just wondering, so for anyone that really wants to become a DOP, is that something they have to do? Is it something that the gaffer can take care of? Like, is the relationship always that the DOP is also can do lighting, or does sometimes they rely on the gaffer more? Do you know what I mean? Or is it just rule 101 is just if you want to get good, then you're going to need to be able to rely on yourself, you know?
Yeah, well, I think that's the thing. I think when you're starting out, you know, as a DP, because I think things have changed. You know, in the old days, it was about working your way up the ladder. You know, you start at the bottom and you slowly work your way all the way to the top. Whereas these days, you can go out and just shoot some stuff on your own straight away. You don't have to. It's always good to, you know, get some experience on sets and meet people and learn from them. But you don't have to, you know, spend 30 years working your way up and hoping to get there one day, kind of thing. So I think, it's now kind of crucial that you can do a lot of it yourself, and you will on those early projects. You will be your own gaffer, or you will be your own camera team, because you just don't have the money or resources or network to bring in someone for everything. But even on those bigger jobs, I think, you know, the gaffer is a creative person, and they have an understanding of lighting, and they understand the technical side of it probably better than I do. But the buck still lies with me to decide what it is we're actually going to do. You know, my conversations with the director are informing what we're doing in this scene, and it's not a case of I turn up with a camera and I say, "Oh, make it look nice," and the gaffer goes and lights it and makes me look good. It tends to
I want a medium close up. Do your thing.
Make it look good for me. So it's the buck definitely lies with the cinematographer to have all the creative decisions, and then the gaffer comes in to suggest how we're going to get there with the equipment we've got or whatever.
So let's say, you know, you've got a DOP that's maybe stepping up into like a really big project that's maybe in a studio or something like that, where suddenly you've got more lights than you've ever could imagine to play with, but you might not have the technical skills of I can't remember who I was speaking to yourself, Dan, or someone else about, you know, like Roger Deakins using like 500 lights above a set to light like this landscape. It's like, how would you know to use 500? But the answer is, I suppose, you know the visuals you want, and the gaffer might have the technical understanding of how to light that space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The gaffer tends to be the one who has to end up doing the work. So, you know, and they sometimes, you know, it happens regularly with me where I have an idea in my head and I know what I'm trying to get to, and I have an idea of how I would do it, but I won't be too, you know, I don't put that onto my gaffer. I say, this is what I'm thinking. Should we maybe use this light, or should we maybe do it this way? And then they'll think and they'll be like, yeah, we could try that, but maybe it'd be better to do it this way. And then I'll say, sure, and let them have a go. And usually they're right, because they know the equipment. They know the equipment better than I do. Yeah.
Really interesting. And I suppose we can't really let you get away with Dan without a confession in this confession. So I think let's go with, and I'll lead. I once worked with a DP. I was working on a short film. We did, well, probably it was an hour and a half of shooting. And then it turned out they had not pressed record. Essentially, they had not been actually shooting. So that's pretty bad. But what was the worst? Come on, give us your worst screw up. What have you done?
My worst screw up. I mean, I've got lots of horror stories that I wouldn't consider my fault. but I don't know. There's loads of things. I mean, at university, I broke their Red Dragon camera, which is a very expensive camera.
What did you
and
do?
they only had one, and it was for everyone. And when I broke it, it was a bit of a hairy. Felt a bit stupid.
So they just take some marks off.
How did you break it?
Yeah. I had to. Well, actually, okay, I'll tell you the whole story. I bet we were shooting our sort of final year project-y films, and I had the camera out, and everyone trusted me because I was a goody two-shoes. But I, with the Red cameras, they've got a very specific card slot and it's built into the camera. When I put the card in, I bent a lot of the pins because I was just a bit aggressive, and all the pins inside that link up with the card got bent. And then that is a send the camera off and get it repaired job. That's not a go in there with a pair of tweezers job. So then I had to, and I did it, and it wasn't working, and nothing was happening. And I think I knew earlier than I admitted to myself what had gone wrong. But I was like, I don't know what happened, but I knew what happened. And then there were no lecturers with us because we were on our own. And then I sort of spoke to someone, and they were like, I think you need to go tell a gentleman called Steve, who was in charge of the department. And unfortunately, he was in a lecture. So I had to walk into a lecture full of people and stand at the back and be like, I need to talk to you, Steve. And he had to stop his lecture and be like, and obviously everyone was just like, oh, something is wrong. So he had to stop his lecture and say to everyone,
across
like,
the room, it's the red.
Yeah,
it's the red.
People were like,
the red's
okay,
down.
all right, everyone just sit tight. And then he came out with me and I explained what happened, and I saw all the colour drain from his face. And then he went back in and was like, the lecture's over, guys. We'll resume this another time. And then I got pulled over to the studio and got a bit of a bollocking from everyone. But
oh no,
it was easily done.
And do you ever sort of, I suppose, being critical of yourself, do you sometimes sort of shoot something and then look at it and go, because obviously you're looking at it pre the grade, which is, and obviously, we're going to do, so we'll talk about grading in another episode, but that sense of the kind of the effects that are done in post-production to alter the look. But do you often sort of look at something you've just shot and just go, that's just a bit,
all the time.
Crap.
I've learned, every single time. No, I mean, there's two elements to that. One is I look at stuff I've shot a year ago, 2 years ago, and I think, oh God, what was I thinking? But I've learned to look at that as a positive thing, because it means that I'm improving. Because if I'm looking back at work I did a few years ago and I think that's the best thing I've ever done, then I've got a problem. Over the last few years, I've not gotten any better. So I'm trying to look at that in a positive way. But definitely in the moments, regularly, even during a take, with a lot of things like short films, you just don't have the time to do anything. So you're just rushing around. And by the time you've put your last light up, the AD and the director want you to call action and go. And I'll be sitting there with the camera on my shoulder or looking at a monitor, and my heart will just slowly sink as I sort of notice all the things I wish I'd done or wish I'd just taken that minute. So I also have tried to have it as a bit of a practice in my work to where I can, and it's very rare I can, but just to take one moment between lighting and action, just to look at a monitor quietly on my own and be like, what's bothering me about this? And sometimes it's just turning lights off that I've put up. I put up 4 or 5 lights, and then I'm like, I don't like it, and why don't I like it? And then I'll just turn off 3 lights and it'll be way better. And I'll be like, okay, cool. I was overdoing it. I was trying to do too much. And actually something simpler is way better. But yeah, regularly I'll be, my heart will start sinking. But then, the problem is when you're, in a film, once you've done one take, you kind of have to just go with it for every take. Otherwise, you change the lighting and suddenly your first take's not usable anymore because of continuity issues. So.
Yeah. But it is also true, isn't it, Dan? There's sort of fads, vogues, fashions of the way things look, aren't there? And we're kind of, a big show will come along, it will have a particular look, and everyone loves this particular big Netflix show or movie or whatever it is. Or I suppose it does some little trick or trope, like, I'm thinking about sort of Modern Family or something on TV where it's got those little zooms, or when the Bourne films first came out and you had that very kinetic camera that was constantly zooming and moving around, looking like it was just handheld the whole time. And suddenly everyone in the world was shooting handheld and making it feel dynamic like that. So I suppose, do you just see kind of those fads kind of come and go?
Yeah, I guess they do. I think, the first conversations anyone has on a project is we look at stuff we like and then we try and copy it. Most things aren't original anymore. We all kind of know that. And like a lot of people do, and when people do come up with an original way of doing something, it's, regarded as being very, next level. But a lot of the time in art in general, it's all about your influences, isn't it? And it's about, what you're drawing from, a bit from here and a bit from here and a bit from here, and try and create something that works for what you're doing. So I think that's why I think, you know, someone does something that works very well, like the way they use a camera, or, you know, fight scenes have become very shaky camera as opposed to, you know, the old martial art films where the camera was locked off and they just did their stunts.
So much better though when it's clean and you can see exactly what's going on, right? Because then you can see the choreography. Although sometimes it's the tandem of like, okay, maybe we've got an actor that can't fight, so,
Yeah.
so you're gonna need to.
You might be
shake it
hiding
up.
something. Yeah, exactly. But they do come and go. I don't think they ever really go though. I think, you know, you look at any Western and it matches the Westerns from the 50s. You know, they don't. Some things don't always go away, or they come back around. But I suppose that's with any kind of trend.
Super interesting. And I suppose look at, you know, over time, if we're talking about sort of the look of a film over time or look of TV stuff, I suppose let's just talk briefly about the kind of the move from film to digital, because I suppose the context of this is when I started making short films, you know, when I was studying and then starting in the industry, it was all on 16 millimeter film, 35 millimeter film, which a lot of our listeners will never have actually held in their hand, but it was the old stuff. It's literally like a reel of film. And I mean, I used to personally, I hated the whole experience of directing, and I started directing and then producing on film because, well, let's list all the problems. It was like I think there was the issue of the holy cow camera, I call it that, which is this basically the camera's quite big and chunky and heavy, and they kind of just got, and everyone was, when it was going, because it was physically costing you money whenever you were recording, because you had to process this film afterwards, and it was expensive. So you might be looking at, you know, £10 a minute just to run the thing by the time you've done it. So as soon as you heard the sound, and it made a very specific sort of sound, everyone kind of like tightened up and they got a bit like, oh my God, we're actually recording. And there was this real sense you couldn't really move the camera very well or very much. It tended to be like this holy cow, it would sort of sit there, and there was this real kind of, there was so much faffing with the camera and changing the hairs, checking the hairs in the gate. And for those people who don't, it used to be this little sort of pubic hair type thing that would come down into your picture and wiggle around, because it had essentially a bit of film had been trapped in what's called the gate or the shutter. You couldn't really see focus because you couldn't actually get a clean picture off a lot of those cameras of whilst you were shooting at the time. So you'd get this kind of blurry black and white sort of picture that was a vague indication of what you got. And then the DP would sort of say, oh, no, you won't see this actually. It'll all disappear. And it was like voodoo and you couldn't really tell. And then if you couldn't watch it back. So if it was like, can we just see that back? How does that look? Did we get it? No, you can't, because you've got to wait. You've got to take the film off, take it to a lab, wait for a day, a week, whatever your budget allows, and then see it later. By that point, you've struck the set, the actors have gone home, and it's too late. I mean, the whole thing was just, for me, I just thought it was a nightmare. So when digital came along, and it was like, it was cheap, relatively, the camera was easier, the camera was lighter, you can play it back. It just seems, and I suppose for Young Film Academy, it made Young Film Academy possible, actually, because pre the digital revolution, the idea that you could get a good quality device that wasn't going to cost you the earth was impossible. So what's your take on that transition?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I love shooting on film, not to just immediately contradict everything you said, but I think it's an interesting one. And I think, I mean, there's definitely a huge resurgence for film. And I think a lot of that comes from people wanting what is now something a bit different from what everyone else is doing. And I think part of that is, you know, there's a lovely aesthetic to film, and it has its own look straight out of the box. You don't have to do loads. But, you know, I believe 9 times out of 10, you can work with what's called a colorist in post-production and make digital look like film again very easily. So whether that matters or not. So I think I shoot film photography as rather than digital photography. I don't do any digital photography.
What, for stills?
For stills work. And I love it, and I like shooting on film. And I think what I like most about it, which I think has been lost a little bit with digital, is that there's a discipline to it that I think people have lost. Because with digital, there's a real risk of, you know, like you say, it doesn't cost you anything to do a bunch more takes of something, or it doesn't cost you anything to just shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot. And the idea of, you know, shooting the rehearsal is a common term that people don't like, a faux pas in the industry where, you know, it's not a rehearsal if you're shooting it, for example. So there's that element to it. And I actually really like when I do shoot on film, there's a discipline where you will rehearse it 5 times until everyone knows what it is and everyone's happy with it. Your focus puller knows exactly where people are moving from and to, and getting those marks, and the actors know, and the director has worked with the actors through all of those rehearsals to get the performances great. And then you might only roll it once or twice. And that's actually
it's like, let's film the rehearsal.
Exactly. Film the rehearsal, 10 takes, whatever.
Well, I think that's a really strong point, especially for young filmmakers. Actually, it's one of the biggest problems that we get is that because it's very easy to do, so a lot of young filmmakers will go out, they will shoot sort of hours and hours of footage, which back in the day wouldn't have been possible on film because it's just too expensive to do that. So they shoot all this stuff. They think, oh, well, we've got loads to work with. But then just even watching it back in the edit, let's say they shoot 3 hours of material for a 10-minute film.
Yeah.
They end up literally watching 3 hours takes 3 hours, and then they get bored, and then they get overwhelmed, and then they forget where they are. And so there's this thing, maybe you could talk to us, what is a shooting ratio? And I suppose what's the lesson there for young filmmakers?
Yeah, well, I guess it's the thing that boils down to is if you spend an hour lighting, preparing, rehearsing, organizing one shot, it's going to be infinitely better than if you spent 5 minutes doing that shot. And I think that is where it comes down to, if you really want to be focusing on everything you're shooting being very considered and being very intentional, and not just shooting everything and anything you can and hoping that later on you've got what you need. Again, that's why I love film photography, because also with those cameras, there's a lot less buttons, and there's no menu to go through, and there's no adjusting all the little bits and the sharpness and the colors in the camera and all that stuff. It's just press record, and then what it means is what you're focusing on is what's in front of the camera and not the camera itself. So you're not worried about time, batteries, cards, all that stuff. You're just worrying about what you're actually pointing at. And because it's so expensive, the amount of times that I bring up my camera and don't take a photo is more often than when I do. And it's because I'm not just taking a photo of every single thing I think might be good. I'm actually looking at it and being, is this worth the £3 it's going to cost me to take this photo? And if it's not, I don't take it. And that's a really nice discipline as well. And that goes into the film thing of, are we shooting this because we just can, or are we shooting this because we think it's really good? And I think that's a discipline that's been lost a little bit. But I think that's a discipline you can take through into digital. So
we say at Young Film Academy, I think we try to stick, we sort of recommend like a 5-to-1 shooting ratio. So if you're trying to make, let's say, a 5-minute film, don't shoot more than 25 minutes of footage total, because then actually you've just got a good chance of the edit can be quite easy, so exactly what you're saying, do all your hard work before you press the record button, and then do it a few times, but don't do the sort of nonsense 30-40 takes, because it's just, you just get lost in all that.
You don't have, like you say, you don't have time to go through it all anyway, or you get bored, you just can't see the woods through the trees.
And Dan, we're gonna have to bring it to an end, I'm afraid, but we just want to hear very briefly about what were you doing during your teenage years to sort of get you to where you are? Because obviously you've shot your feature Manfish, which you were the DOP on, and you've worked on some high-end TV work and loads of commercials as well. What were you doing in your formative years that sort of got you to this point? And then what was the advice that you would give to yourself?
It's a very good question. Not a lot. I wasn't actually. I guess I came to it quite late, which doesn't help anyone. But I came to it a little bit later.
It's reassuring, mate.
But I came to it a bit later because I didn't. I suppose so. Yeah, I'll put a positive spin on it. You hear about Spielberg and people being 5 years old and getting their dad's camera and making their first movie, and you're like, oh god, I'm 15 and I haven't done that. And like I perpetually feel that. But I think it's. Yeah, I guess I always knew I was creative and I knew I was a visual person, but I didn't have anyone in my family who was in the industry, or anyone, my parents weren't creative people or, in the industry that way or anything. So I guess I didn't know at the time that it was a thing I could do until I went to university. But then I kind of always had a feeling for it because I was, in my art class or my graphic design class at school, I wasn't the kid who was doing a painting on a canvas. I was the kid who was going out and making a music video, or going and making something a lot more, visual or tactile, or, working with visual mediums like that. And, they weren't very good, but I guess I knew, now I know back then that was where my interest lay, was in video. And I was an avid film watcher. I watched a lot of movies. I watched a lot of TV shows. And I was a bit of a film buff. So that was, I always knew it was in me, but I just didn't know that it was a thing I could do as a job.
And did you go to university?
I did.
And what did you study there?
So I studied film, but only by accident because I turned up on the wrong open day. And so I'd applied everywhere for graphic design because, again, I was visual. I knew that was a job. I didn't know that anything else was a job, but I knew, okay, I'm creative and I'm visual and that makes sense. So I applied everywhere for that. And then I turned up on the wrong open day at university, and the graphic design talk wasn't happening. And so I looked on the little thing, and there was a talk for film making, and I was like, oh, I guess I'll go look at that. And then I was there, wide-eyed and like, I can do this for a job. And then and then I think I got into that uni as a graphic designer, and then I think 2 or 3 days before I joined, I phoned them up and swapped over. And I told my parents sometime later on that I'd changed courses. Luckily,
13 years later,
they still think I'm not a graphic designer.
So that's a fantastic origin story, though, isn't it? Turning up on the wrong day.
And I suppose, because if I was, a young listener listening to this, I might be at school, I might be interested in art and sort of have a visual eye and understand that I'm really interested in how things look and textures and tones. I suppose then the other element to that is the tech stuff, because, as a DP, you are required to be technologically savvy. You do for good or bad have to operate a lot of gear and kit and be that person, especially when you start. Often the DP in a young filmmakers group is kind of like the most technical one. They just know how the gear works. So I suppose, can you just talk us through, like, how did you make that jump if that wasn't your background? How did you find and do that?
Just practice, to be honest. I think it's like, I know loads of DPs that aren't super technical people, but it's the ideas are more important than the technology, I think, and what you're doing in front of the camera is more important than the camera itself. But there's a wealth of resources on YouTube to all these courses, the courses you guys do teach. There's loads of ways of learning the technical side of it. So I think knowing that you have like a passion for it is the most important thing. And there's an old a lot of the older DPs will be like, oh yeah, you've got iPhones now, you can just go make a movie on your iPhone. And it is true, you can go and practice on your iPhone and get some shots and work with friends, and you don't everyone has a camera now, so that is a thing that a lot of people didn't have 20, 30 years ago. And that has changed things a lot. But I think really it's just practice, and you'll make mistakes. And like I say, the stuff I'll look at 10 years ago that I shot, I'll cringe now because it's not where I am now, but I'm only where I am now through years and years and years of making the mistakes or not knowing how the camera works, or, you only really learn through making the mistakes. So I'll make a film and it'll be underexposed or out of focus. And then I'll be like, okay, I now know the problem with that, and I know how to fix it next time. But I think, I'm just trying not to be too much of a perfectionist, I think, because some people as well, they will never release anything or they'll never put anything out there because they're worried it's not perfect. And actually, like, it won't be perfect. I think there's a thing with filmmaking where people expect their first films or their first things to be amazing. And it's like, there's no other discipline where you'd expect that. You wouldn't expect your first cake you ever made to be the best cake, or the first, you would never expect to be able to build a house straight away as a carpenter, whatever it is. So you just got to keep practicing.
That's my issue.
Learning.
I have this conversation a lot with the debut culture. Do you know what I mean? It's like debut film. It's like that doesn't illustrate very well for those that are aspiring the amount of time and effort goes in. Imagine if you did that though with houses, like their debut house. It's like nonsense, absolute nonsense. There's no way they did that plumbing.
And Jimi Hendrix didn't pick up a guitar and was Jimi Hendrix immediately. He spent many years being a rubbish guitarist before he was the world's greatest guitarist and stuff. So I think that is the thing that I have to keep reminding myself it to this day. Being critical.
There's a lovely story about Eddie Izzard, who I think he was Eddie Izzard, the comedian, who does some acting, and sometimes his roles come in for a bit of sticking when he's acting. And someone asked him, "Why would you want to be a mediocre actor when you can be a brilliant comedian?" And he said, "Because I was a mediocre comedian once."
Amazing, love it.
And lastly, Dan, advice to yourself?
Well, I think I would just follow on from that point. Don't be too hard on myself and try not to be a perfectionist, and just constantly practice, get out there, do stuff. And actually just do stuff for the love of it. Don't always do stuff just because there's an end goal in mind. Like, don't only shoot something if someone has asked you to shoot it. Just go and try and learn and do stuff without it. Even if you're never ever going to release it, the act of doing it is more important than the end result sometimes. And I think that's something I wish I'd been better at, and still wish I was better at today.
That's beautiful. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been
Thank you so much, Dan. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Super cool. I feel like they're starting to get almost holistic towards the end, James, isn't it? It's sort of starting to almost pull away from cinematography and more just about artistry in general, in a way that I was connecting with it. You know, I was like, oh man, I felt like I really needed to hear some of that stuff. You know, like let's just make it. You know.
And I think that's, I mean, my impression is that a lot of those, you know, sort of what appears to be technical roles when you first get into it, especially when you first start, they are very technical, as Dan was talking about, that kind of, because it's just you. So you have to push all the buttons and you have to turn on all the lights and you have to know how it all fixes together and all that stuff, which is a kind of barrier to entry for some people, unless you're technically minded, in which case it's just hooray, you get to play with toys. But I think as you develop and as you progress in your career and more people come in and they start pushing buttons and putting things up, and you essentially, as Dan was saying, it becomes less about that stuff, and it's craft, yes, and art, and it's that perfect kind of synthesis when it's right, about trying to create, because eventually a DP is only trying to create or add to the emotional feeling of the piece, whether you're trying to make people laugh or cry or be scared or whatever it is. So you're just doing it through light hitting a sensor, because if we break it down, that's what a camera's doing, right? It's pulling in light, it's hitting a sensor, and it's creating a picture. So you have to create that light and capture that light in the way that serves the story best. And I loved it. I just thought it was so interesting about that.
Yeah, for sure. I always like to think of it's like painters, right? Like when you start off painting, the brush doesn't matter. Like, I just need some paint and a brush, and I'm gonna make a painting no matter what, and it's gonna be really cool. Yada yada yada, but then the brushes start to matter. Then you're like, I see. I'm starting to use these paints from this brand, and I'm starting to use these fine brushes, and you start to then learn the technicalities of how the tools work. And then you get to a point where then they start to matter less. It's like, okay, no, I now understand how those brushes and tools work. It's now back to the intention. What is it I want to do? You're absolutely
right. It's like a sort of graph, isn't it? With a sort of, or I think, again, I mentioned Izzard, and he has this he calls it the wheel of cool. Where you sort of start off and it's like, you're looking quite cool, looking very cool, looking incredibly cool, and looking like a dickhead. You're sort of, and then you're back to where you started. You just, it's a full 360. And I think that's absolutely right. And I've noticed it. I mean, it's interesting what Dan was saying about he loves film.
Yeah.
And I kind of think, I've noticed this, I've got some friends who work in music, and they're music producers, so they spend their entire time basically with loads of decks and wires trying to create the finest sounds, the best. And they're very interested in going back to, especially in audio terms, kind of analog, old school. A friend of mine's just got a 1970s, he bought it on eBay, kind of mixing desk, and he's super excited about how it all analog goes together. And so yes, it's harder to operate, and it's harder to it's not as convenient, but because it sounds different from everything else. And so a lot of these guys at the high end of this, they're looking for that point of difference. How can you do something that's different from what 99% of stuff is?
Yeah. And also it's mediums, right? It's similar with what we were talking about with film. It's like, it's what do you want the piece to feel like? How are you going to interact with it and respond to it? And just by the process being different, inevitably the end result is going to be different. Like if you are rehearsing something 10 times because you're about to shoot it on film, then there's a bit more sort of it's more of a monumental occasion, the fact that you're pressing the record button, so you're going to treat that whole experience differently, and what you are capturing will be slightly different.
so if you've got like a 70s thing that you're interacting with, and it's probably significantly more tactile than a contemporary sort of digital music box that can literally do anything and you can program it any which way, to actually interact with something that's more physical, more old school, that maybe can only produce certain sounds, but nothing else can produce sounds like it. Then it's you're gonna it's gonna change the process, which is gonna change the result. And often that's what you want for the project, right? It's what can I do differently on this thing for the thing. I don't know if you've ever sort of gone down obscure routes for projects for things.
I mean, yes, I just felt very strong. I was quite scarred in my early days by working on film so much, because I just did. I mean, it's interesting to hear from Dan's sort of aesthetic perspective. He loves film, but from a producer's perspective and a director's perspective, I just found it an absolute nightmare. Yeah. And in fact, if you're listening to this and you kind of think, I wasn't really, I don't know much about that difference. There's a great documentary that Keanu Reeves, the actor, made, and he fronts. It's called Side by Side, and we show it at Young Film Academy at times, and it's brilliant. And he gets some of the top directors and DPs in the world, and they're all interviewed about why they love or hate film versus video. Because obviously people like Christopher Nolan, they absolutely love film. He always wants to shoot on film. Yeah. Someone like David Fincher.
The bigger film, the better.
Yeah,
70 millimeter, 100 millimeters.
And David Fincher kind of hates it, and he loves the digital experience. And it's just really interesting to sort of hear.
David Fincher, who for listeners infamously loves to do 100 takes.
Exactly. So he doesn't want to pay for extra. But and he's super interesting. David Fincher talks about actually DPs in this thing. He says they used to love film because of the voodoo, because they have power. So essentially, he said, nowadays I can look at the monitor and I'll go, looks too dark. And the DP has to go, really? And then they have to, whereas previously you looked at this sort of pitchy black and white image and you'd be like, but we can see all of those cables down there and it looks a bit rubbish. And they go, no, it'll disappear. And you're like, what do you mean it'll disappear? Because when it was actually developed, what you were watching through that little monitor wasn't what the film was actually capturing. So the DP was like the kind of shaman in this voodoo world, and it allowed them this kind of power to just be like, don't worry, it'll disappear. It will not be there. What you are seeing, I will make it disappear.
That I can see that, right? Because it's like we're gonna paint with lights, and it's gonna go into the magic box, and then the magic box is gonna spit out a story. And when no one else on set knows how the magic box works.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas when you look at the monitor and just be like, but we can see that is terrible. Then it's a bit more prosaic. And I was thinking about, sort of, I think Dan was really interesting when he was talking about how the camera, it becomes not about the camera. And I was thinking about Danny Boyle and how he works, and he works with his DP, where they kind of, I remember on Slumdog Millionaire, I think that they kind of, the DP actually wanted to not be holding this sort of big camera thing. It's actually why cameras, I think, have got smaller. There's a particular camera called the Alexa Mini, right, which a lot of things are now shot on, which is this sort of really quite a small box. I mean, by the time you put lenses and things, it gets bigger, but it can be quite small. But they wanted to make it even smaller, and I think, didn't they, that he had this kind of almost like a handheld eyeball camera, a bit like almost like a webcam, but it was a super sort of high-res webcam. And then the DP kind of had it attached to a kind of recording box on his belt, and literally he was moving his arm, rather like you were kind of, if you imagine you're kind of animating an emu or something, and he could move it wherever his arm was. And so the camera got this dynamic energy that felt kind of crazy and frenetic, which was trying to mirror the Mumbai and those kind of that slum environment, and it was just a different way of doing things than just holding the camera or putting on a tripod or putting on a
it's weird, right? Like Danny Boyle and his films, technically it's almost like he's always pushed the boat out, but it's like he's always pushed the boat backwards. In the sense of, like, you got Christopher Nolan, who sort of feels like he's pushing the boat out because he's filming on the biggest format possible. Similar, David Fincher does it digitally. He wants to shoot on the latest red cameras, the latest one that can shoot in like 20K or whatever, right? Which isn't an actual thing, but he will go the highest possible. And Danny Boyle's like, yeah, we could shoot this on a Canon 70D. Which is sort of like, it's pushing it out in the sense of like no one would do that because it's a smaller lens, a smaller sensor. It's less tried and proven on a big cinema screen. But he's thinking, I can use that in more versatile places than you could put a film camera, right?
Absolutely.
Which is exactly what you were saying with that sort of eyeball camera.
He's not being the holy cow camera thing where it's just like a box that's God on set. It's like, who cares whether it's here or there? It doesn't really matter. It's
Yeah. And I think he does care about sort of texture to a degree. Like, I think there was a conscious decision to shoot 28 Days Later. His fantastic zombie film was shot on a Canon XL2.
Which we had at Young Film Academy. They were our first cameras at Young Film Academy. And in fact, we still have one that you've now taken on as a relic.
Absolutely. And I just don't have room for it at my house. So it sits next to my desk at YFA and I look at it every day and it's very nice.
Cool.
They are like beautifully designed cameras, and they're shot on DV tape. So that was the sort of digital but still physical medium. It was sort of the intermediate step to memory cards, was shooting on tape. So those films were certainly the first one. The second one was shot on cinema cameras, I think, 28 weeks later. But 28 Days was shot on XL2. I think they maybe did some lens adapting stuff. You always get this as well, like people that shoot on iPhone, it's like shot on an iPhone.
But then they used a $100,000 lens. Yeah.
They find a way to like stick a cinema lens on it. And it's like, I mean, it was shot on an iPhone, but also, it wasn't shot through an iPhone lens. It was, adapted. So, and then his... Slumdog Millionaire obviously used the eyeball thing. It was what's the one where he has to cut off his own arm? Do you know what I'm talking about? 23 weeks or 23 days. 127 hours. Wait, is that
yeah,
right?
I think it is. Yeah, no, you're right. I remember it was something about a number and type. Yeah, 100.
Yeah. And that he used the Canon 70D to like get it into like really tight spaces and whatnot. Yeah.
Well, as I say, it's interesting when you first start out, it's all about trying to get a better quality picture. And then you start to realize that actually it's so much of it's about the lens. And then you realize that unfortunately, as we said, lenses are still expensive, but because they're kind of timeless. And then at some point you just go past that and you stop caring about that stuff and you end up back in sort of going backwards just to get an aesthetic. I thought that was so interesting. I didn't get a chance to ask Dan about my favorite. I don't know about you, Dan, but which is sort of like, it's kind of like a piece of production, I suppose. It would be art department maybe, but sometimes you're asked, like, what is the thing that's going to give you the most production values cheaply on your set, like that you can do? And I always think it's like a dolly and track, because you can actually get really cheap dolly and tracks and get some fantastic shots that are super easy, and a smoke machine, which is now called haze machine. Because haze don't use smoke. We used to smoke back in the day and it set off all the fire alarms wherever you were filming. It's a disaster. They now have this haze machine, doesn't do that. And if you can get hold of one, oh my God, if you just add a bit of haze in almost anywhere and you get texture in the light, it's like it adds grain to everything. It's just magic.
Yeah, it does. And it adds sort of layers of depth, right? It enhances the fact that the things in the background are out of focus, because they're also a slightly softer color, because the further back you go, the more haze there is, and those things are more washed out. And it really it really changes the room. If you're doing a horror film, it feels like a must. Like, just stick them in every scene, even if you don't want it to be. Just haze the whole damn thing.
I've done that with fun. Then they go too much, and you go like everyone's opening the windows. It's like, it's way too much haze in here. What's going on?
100%. Another thing you can do as well in terms of like just cost to output is just single source lighting is often very useful. If you don't have the resources to light every shot properly. And by properly, I mean, you might have like a key light. Most actors, you want to side light them, because when you light someone front on, it just looks very flat. Side light them, backlight them a little bit, and then have a little bit of fill on the other side, sort of filling in some of the details. Let's do sort of traditional 3-point lighting setup. But if you can just find a place for one source of light for your room, maybe that is a window. And if that's natural light, then that's very cheap. But if it's like a moody, like dinner table scene, maybe just one bulb above everyone, that is going to be dynamic. That is going to be exciting to look at. And it's certainly going to be far better than if it looked like every light in the whole space was on.
Totally. And I think that for young filmmakers, as you rightly say, using natural light, like actually, that lights, yes, they've got better. Yes, they've got cheaper. Yes, LED panels are fantastic and can be, but they are slow as well. I mean, when you're making a film, when you first start, and you're often time pushed, you've got your mates together, you've got a group together of young people, you want to make something. You don't have limitless time. I mean, you've got lots going on in your life. So you've probably got 2 days or something max to do this thing. And actually, lights can really slow you down, because it's like you do this shot, then you got to reset all the lights, move around. And we see this at summer camp a lot, where we've, the 2-week filmmakers have got, I think, 4 production days. And often they start to realize that actually if they're doing too much lighting setups, it's just too slow. So almost as soon as you go outside, that's great, because you really don't use lights outside, because you can't compete with the giant nuclear bulb in the sky called the sun, so you don't bother. Mm-hmm. And also even inside, that's one of the things that modern cameras do much better than the first digital cameras, which used to require a lot of light to kind of give you any picture. Like their low light sensitivity is now so good that actually you don't need huge amounts of light to get good quality pictures anymore. So often just using natural light creatively is kind of your best solution. And okay, maybe some of it looks a bit grainy and a bit like a bit shady, but maybe that's a look. There's a lot of people who kind of try to find that look artificially.
Yeah, 100%. I would say though, watch out on the lower end cameras when it does get noisy in the dark. What it does is it starts to not know what color the pixel is meant to be. So that's where you get color noisy. Noisy. So it's a bit like grain. So it's a bit grainy in the sense it looks speckly when you watch it in playback. But sometimes in the low end, that causes it to freak out, and the pixels will actually be flicking between sort of red, green, and blue, because it doesn't know what it's meant to be. The answer is it should be a dark shade of grey. But yeah, on lower end cameras, then it's rubbish. But on decent cameras, or at least just Blackmagic cameras, they're not known to be great in low light, but they don't color fluctuate in low light. So the Blackmagic cameras all look really good. And stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly an area where for young people, the world has rotated in your favor now. There's still to get a good bit of equipment, you still have to pay money for it, but it's not the stupid money that it used to be. I mean, it's kind of to get actually amazing results, has become achievable on sort of very amateur budgets now. Talking of which, actually, Dan, I've got a question on this.
Ooh.
From Gemma, who's 16.
Is it coming via carrier pigeon?
Here she comes. Gemma is 16 from East London, and she says,
Hi,
I'm just starting out making films. What camera should I get? And this is a question we get quite a lot at Young Film Academy, isn't it?
We do get this quite a lot, yeah. And it's a good question, and I get it. It's a really hard one to answer though, because there's so many factors at play. There are certain levels of cameras that are just above the threshold of good enough for cinema. Most of those cameras are not affordable for a first camera. So then it's about what it is you want to achieve. For instance, if you just want to get up and shoot something, the reality is your phone nowadays probably has a better camera in it than any camera that's available up until the £400, £500 mark. Genuinely, your phone is better than all those cameras. Any of those little handy cams, forget about it. Your phone is generally fantastic. I want to say your phone, I mean, as long as your phone came out in the last 2 years. Because most of the cost of that phone is the camera and display, which then puts you into the category of digital SLRs, which is what we always recommend, because those are the first level of camera that have interchangeable lenses, which is an opportunity for you to learn and grow with your visuals and your understanding of what the different lenses do. Like what does a 50mm look like when I point that at someone? What's it like if I shoot a wide on a zoom lens as opposed to a wide angle? Like, what's the different feel like? How do I change the depth of field? All of those things are things that you can learn and grow your filmmaking skills once you have a digital SLR. So, and then it's just about how good of a digital SLR can you afford, is what I would say. But we all know that digital SLRs do have some drawbacks, which is always the drawbacks. It's sound, right, James?
It's sound, yeah. I mean, this is the big one. Because I was going to say the other option is you go down a sort of what used to be called the sort of handy cam, which is kind of all in one. Because that's the... I totally take your point about the interchangeable lenses, and that's absolutely right. But when you're first starting out, do you afford different lenses? I mean, so I think, I don't know what the stats are, but I'd imagine 90% of DSLR owners have just one lens that they never take it off. So then you're into, maybe you get one of those sort of all-in-one handycam solutions, which can get really good. They've got really good sort of resolution now, and they have probably better built-in sound, because a lot of those DSLRs are not. But even then, your sound is not going to be great. So that is the big issue. You can get sort of separate microphones, which you can then put into either a DSLR or one of those handycams by a sort of standard 3.5 mil, looks like almost like a headphone socket, but it is just a microphone lead. And then that can connect, you can have a long lead and connect it to a broom handle and have a microphone at the end, just to get it close to your subject and get decent sound. The very best is you can get something with what's called an XLR input, which is just a bigger connection. But, inevitably things that have XLR connections tend to be at a slightly higher price point. Or you could record sound completely separately, which is obviously what we do in the industry. And you get a recorder. You buy your own separate sound recorder, but it just becomes quite a lot of steps and quite hassly. And for people who start off,
it also just adds the element of you do need another person. But the reality is, if you want your sound to be really good, and we're making an assumption here, which is that if you're starting out making films, you are probably the director and the cinematographer. Obviously, that might not be the case if you're about to go to university and you know that you're going to work in a team. But for the most part, if you're shooting and you're listening to this, you probably are doing a bit of everything. If you want better sound, you will need someone to help you. And what I actually used to do in my very early films, I had a Zoom recorder, so I had a Zoom H2. So you can there's a bunch of new versions now. But
they start from they're about £200, I think, maybe £250, something like that.
Even the H1 is probably very good. And they've got a small tripod thread at the bottom, so you can stick them on a monopod. So this is literally what I did. I got a friend and I gave him a monopod with a Zoom H2 screwed onto the end of the monopod and a set of headphones with a very long cable. And you start and stop recording on the Zoom, and then you would extend it out and then put it near the subject, and he could monitor and record the sound using one device. Because otherwise, the next step is that, generally speaking, you have a really good boom microphone, which are those ones with the big fluffy boom guards or wind guards, and then that has to cable to your recorder, and then you're recording from there. Do you know what I mean? That's quite a few pieces of equipment. Whereas if you're recording to a Zoom, which has a really good microphone in, slightly naff in windy environments, but you can get wind guards for them. But that actually was a very good solution, but obviously requires one person.
Yeah. And last thing I'd say on cameras is that sometimes we get some young people who come to us and sort of say, I've heard that there's this great super duper 4K camera. So something like the Blackmagic, which for instance does these amazingly relatively speaking. So let's put some numbers on this. For what you achieve, I think the Blackmagic 4K for about £800, I think, something like that. And someone might look at that and think, wow, this is incredible. Yes, it's a lot of money, but for what I can get, just be aware that those cameras are what we call modular, which basically means if you buy that £800 box, you get you get a part of the jigsaw puzzle that you need, and then you have to get all the other bits of the jigsaw puzzle that you don't first realize. You've got to buy separate batteries, and you've got to buy a separate holder for this, and a separate bit for this, and a separate connector for this, and an adapter for that. And before you know it, you spent more than the camera on those other bits, and then you've got to look after those bits and have a system and all this stuff. So, sometimes just trying to keep it simple. That's why the DSLR, the digital DSLR, which is basically, if you can work out a sound recording solution either directly to the camera or separately, you've got a great starting point. And it's going to cost you money, but it will enable you to get some great results.
You flagged two really important things there, I think, which is it's the added cost. We've already mentioned sound, but the added cost of storage and batteries. Whatever camera you're looking at, look up how much it costs for each. Some digital SLRs or some cameras require certain classes of SD cards, so there's a little bit of technicalities there. You're welcome to email us if you have questions about that, but give it a Google, which is just about sort of SD card speeds. The camera will generally say it requires like a class 10 or something like that. But depending on what memory cards a thing takes, like some of the Blackmagics only take SSDs, I think. The moment you're in SSD territory, you're talking hundreds of pounds for storage. And that's
solid state drives.
Solid state drives, yeah. As opposed to an SD card, which you can get for 30, 40 quid. And then batteries on a low-end digital SLR, you can buy knockoff replacement batteries, which are generally pretty good. They'll do the job, but you could get like 5 of them, which will actually get you through a day, and they might cost you like 10 quid each. Whereas on some cameras that have their own bespoke battery system, you're talking hundreds for a battery, and you're going to need at least 2 or 3 to get you through a chunk of the day, depending on how big.
Because I know that the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, for instance, the batteries last about 20 minutes, half an hour max.
Yeah, they last like 30 minutes.
It's crazy. So you need
because they're designed to be used with something like a V-Lock battery, which is like a high end. That's like that's a battery that you would get on a professional film set, powering a professional camera.
Yeah.
You're meant to get an adapter to go with this thing. Otherwise, you have to buy a lot of these small batteries.
So I'm aware that Gemma's listening to this and thinking, "My God, that was a simple question," and my God, you've given me a complicated answer. So it's not a simple answer, but basically, Gemma, try and keep it simple. Maybe think digital DSLR. Think about sound. Just keep the sound solution constant in your brain with whatever you go for. The phone is always a great option when you start. And actually, in terms of built-in sound, but even with the phone, you can actually get options to record sound either separately or put a separate microphone into your phone, because that will be the kicker. So I hope that answers your question, Gemma, and good luck.
Don't let these thoughts get in the way of your creativity. If you're having issues with sound, make a film with no dialogue. You can make an impeccable film with no dialogue, sincerely, and with great performances and everything, and you may be able to rebuild the sound in post, and that just takes time.
The Artist
if you don't
won an
have the
Oscar
money,
doing that, Dan.
put the time in. Huh?
The movie The Artist won an Oscar.
Yeah, 100%.
Doing that, no sound, no dialogue at all.
Very impressive.
Well, I think, Dan, you've been definitely the best boy of this episode.
I think you've been a real gaffer, James. So,
see what you did there.
But yeah, thanks everyone. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us. And do email your questions to podcasts@youngfilmacademy.co.uk.
Podcast singular.
Oh, podcast singular. I lied. It's podcast@youngfilmacademy.co.uk. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for your time.